The never-ending cycle of war, conflict, and politics in the news. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start with a question. When was the last time you turned on the news, scrolled through your social media feed, or opened a newspaper and felt hopeful? Felt inspired? Felt like the world was moving in a positive direction? For many of us, the answer might be not recently, or perhaps not ever. And it's not because the world is devoid of good things, it's because the news doesn't seem all that interested in showing them to us. Instead, the news cycle often feels like a relentless parade of war, conflict, and politicians. It's as if the world is stuck in an endless loop of despair, with the same stories told over and over again, just with different names and places. Let's start with the fixation on war and conflict. Every day, headlines scream about battles fought in far-off lands, nations at odds, and lives lost in disputes that many of us struggle to comprehend. It's relentless. One conflict ends and another takes its place, often before the dust has even settled. But how much of this coverage truly helps us understand the root causes of these wars? How often does it offer solutions or highlight stories of peace-building efforts? Rarely. Instead, we're bombarded with images of destruction, suffering, and fear. While it's essential to stay informed about global events, the way these stories are presented often paints an incomplete picture. Where are the stories about the communities that rebuild after war? The leaders who choose diplomacy over aggression? The organisations working tirelessly to foster understanding and reconciliation? The truth is, peace doesn't sell as well as conflict. Stories of hope don't keep us glued to our screens the way fear does. The news industry thrives on our instinctive reactions to danger and outrage, and war is a surefire way to trigger those emotions. Now, let's talk about the other major player in this cycle: politicians. It feels like political figures are smeared across everything the media puts out. Whether they're being celebrated, criticised, or outright vilified, they dominate the headlines. But how often are these stories actually about meaningful policies or actions? More often than not, it's about drama, a heated exchange, a scandal, a soundbite taken out of context. The media turns politics into entertainment, less about governing and more about gossip. And we as consumers are drawn into the spectacle, whether we like it or not. Take a moment to think about this. How much of what you know about politicians is based on their actual work, and how much is based on their public personas, shaped by media coverage that thrives on sensationalism? The constant focus on political conflict, who's fighting with whom, who's rising in the polls, who's falling, distracts us from what really matters. It shifts the spotlight away from policies that affect our lives, from debates that deserve our attention, and from the solutions we desperately need to address the challenges we face as a society. This obsession with conflict, both in war and politics, creates a distorted view of the world. It convinces us that we are more divided than we really are, that the world is more dangerous than it truly is, that our leaders are incapable of cooperation or compromise. And while we're inundated with these stories of division, countless stories of unity, resilience, and innovation go untold. Where are the stories of scientists breaking new ground in renewable energy? Of local communities coming together to tackle homelessness? Of young people leading movements for social change? They exist, but they're buried beneath the avalanche of headlines about war zones and political rivalries. Now, I'm not saying the news should ignore the hard truths of our world. It's important to report on war, on injustice, and on the actions of those in power. But what I am saying is that the current balance is off. When all we see is conflict and chaos, it's easy to feel hopeless. It's easy to believe that our world is beyond saving, that our voices don't matter, that change is impossible. But that's not the full story. The full story includes the peacemakers, the innovators, the activists, and the everyday people who are quietly making the world a better place. It includes the teachers who inspire their students, the doctors who work tirelessly to save lives, the artists who bring beauty and meaning to our lives. These stories matter just as much as the stories of war and politics, maybe even more, because they remind us of what's possible. They remind us that we are capable of incredible things when we work together. So what can we do about this imbalance? First, We can demand better from our news outlets. We can ask them to broaden their scope to include stories of hope and progress alongside the stories of conflict. We can support journalists who take the time to dig deeper, to tell the stories that often go unnoticed. Second, we can take responsibility for the media we consume. We can seek out alternative sources of information, look for the good news that's out there, and share it with others. And finally, we can be storytellers ourselves. We can share the positive things happening in our own communities, celebrate the achievements of those around us, and remind each other that the world is not as bleak as it sometimes seems. The news may never stop talking about war and politicians, but that doesn't mean we have to accept a narrative that leaves us feeling powerless. We have the power to change the conversation, to shine a light on the stories that inspire us, and to remind each other that there is always hope, even in the darkest of times. Thank you.